This is a test of the emergency podcast system. Please stand by for a special news episode of Underserved. Hello and welcome to a special emergency edition of Underserved, the podcast for the rest of the tech industry. There's been a scandal in the poker world / Twitch streaming world. And so my guest today, I have back Mike Breault, who was in episode 7 of Underserved, who was, as you may recall, a math major, software developer, and definitely interested in online poker and live poker as well. So welcome back, Mike.
Thanks for having me again.
This story is interesting for a number of reasons for technologists. It involves technology from streaming the game to possible collusion in cheating the game, to crowdsourced investigation of what exactly happened in the game, applying math and statistics in order to figure out, yeah, it looks like there's cheating that's going on. Now let's try and figure out how it's happening. A lot of folks play poker. In casinos, a common version is no limit hold'em. And you can play either a cash game where you sit down with money and play. And when you get up, you just take whatever chips you had off the table, turn it back into cash. The one that you see on TV more often is tournament, where you buy in for X dollars, let's say $100, and everyone plays until someone has all the money and then they win the lion's share of the money. It's less popular, but there are streamed cash games where you can watch people play No Limit Hold'em against each other. And there's one from a casino in California that got a lot of attention recently. So, Mike, why don't you walk us through it?
Thank you. So about a week ago, a woman named Veronica Brill, who plays games in that feed sometimes, but is also a commenter, came out on Twitter and accused a man named Mike Postle of cheating. It's Postle. She said she had gone to management and they had said, no, there's nothing going on. We looked into it. You're just jealous. Mike Postle's just a really good player.
So she's an employee of the casino, but occasionally she plays in the games.
Yes.
Okay.
We should say the whole setup at Stone's Gambling Hall is really interesting. From the commentary, which is somewhat bizarre, to just the whole setup, and just the cross-mingling of employees and players is going to be really relevant as we go through this. So she goes on to Twitter and says, does anyone in the gambling community want to help me figure this out? So the internet mobilizes, and there's a very popular forum called 2+2, which has been around for a long time to talk about poker discussions. They start a Mike Postle cheating thread. People realize that every game that he's played, they do at least 2 streams a week. They're posted on the YouTube channel. They have been for years. People decide to start watching all these games and logging meticulously everything that's going on, to not only his win rate, but his seat position, to what he's wearing. He always wears a hat. Like, what kind of hat is he wearing? Where's his phone? Where are his keys? What are some of his mannerisms? People also...
His chips stacked.
Right. So somebody makes a Google spreadsheet that logs all this data. Some data analysts, again, shockingly, the cross-pollination of people that are good at software engineering and math and poker is extremely high. So somebody grabs all this data, starts doing some regressions on it, does some plot graphs, and we quickly realize that Mike Postle has been winning for the last year at a rate that is orders of magnitude higher than any human being that's ever played. It would literally make him the best poker player that's ever lived.
Times 10.
Yes. If you want to Google Mike Postle graphs, probably the second result will be an amazing scatter plot that shows a huge distribution of average poker players. There's one dot to the right about halfway across that shows a known bot. I believe it was from Absolute Poker. That was a typical online poker scandal from a while ago where one of the founders was actually looking at people's hands and had the data. So that's a known bot. Mike Postle is...
To the right of the bot?
To the right of that by, again, like in order of 10. So the math quickly proved that this is not possible. And then analysis of the video, which was mostly driven by a guy named Joe Ingram, who's a professional poker player, a very good PLO player. He finished 17th in the World Series last year, so he's legit. He started watching just like, okay, let's look at 5 hours of Mike Postle playing and see what's going on. So you're already predispositioned from the math, like, okay, there's no way this win rate's sustainable, but how is he actually doing it? And the how becomes really apparent because Mike Postle never makes a bad decision, ever. He gets out when he has great hands that somebody flops something better. He makes just ridiculous folds, great hero calls, incredible reads when someone's bluffing. If you watch one hand in isolation, everyone's going to say, oh, I can do that. I've done that before, X, Y, Z. That's not really the issue. In totality, you can watch him go to the river 30 times and make the correct decision 30 times. People as famous as Daniel Negreanu literally said that nobody does that. That's where we were come about Friday. Everyone in the poker community is like, all right, this guy is cheating. Now, how is he doing it? So over the weekend, a lot of people started pouring over the videos more. More columns started getting added to the spreadsheet. More detailed analysis started happening. And someone uncovers the exact moment where this started happening. We looked at a graph of his average win rate just over the past year and a half. And you can see at a very specific moment at the end of July that suddenly he becomes, I forget what it was, like he had been winning like $800 a session or something. You sit down with either 500 or 1,000. And then from there, he averages mostly 8,000 to 20,000. Well, that's a good point. We should mention. He's just sitting at a 1-3 table and sometimes a 5-5 table and winning $8,000 to $20,000 a night.
Yeah, so for those who don't play a lot of poker, 1-3 no limit is there's a $1 small blind, $3 big blind. So those are forced bets. And all your bets are basically going to be bigger than that or pre-flop, flop, all the way to the river. 5-5, there's two $5 blinds. So usually people are sitting down with $500 to $1,000, as Mike said. And if you have a session where you're doubling through, get $800 to $1,000 when you sat down with 1,000, that's a darn good day. Going 8 to 20 times that and having multiple days like that is just unheard of. Yeah.
So when you look at the totality of it, that yes, somebody can make a great read, or maybe you do have a great tell on someone, but to do it this consistently for this long, the numbers keep changing. At one point, I heard he was profitable on 63 of 69 sessions. Now it's up more like 80 out of 89 or something, including 22 straight days. It's not possible. There were trends emerged that when he became what people call a super user, which is usually in online poker terms, like that means a bot. And the super user knows what people have as their hold cards. Someone found the exact moment when this happened, that he takes his phone at July 18th, 2018. He takes his phone from the rail and puts it between his legs. And from that moment, Mike Postle becomes a super user. We know what kind of player he was before. Now he's the world's best poker player ever. So that's where we are right now. Now that you go back, once we see the phone thing and you go back to all these hands where he made these great hero calls, always looking at his phone first. Always looking at his phone. The times where he loses, forgets what cards people have, can't look at his phone. Looks at his phone as soon as the hand's over and is completely distraught. So there's really no question now about, one, that yes, he's cheating. Two, we know how he's cheating, at least by looking at his phone. I remind you, this really has just taken place over a week now, so this story is very much still...
very fresh.
Yes. So now the real question is, what's on his phone? Did he act alone? What's going to happen next?
So why don't you give us a few theories about that either you came up with or you've read online about what is on his phone?
So this is where the tech part comes in, and there's going to be some conspiracy theories in here. I like to frame things as like, what do I think? What do I know? What can I prove? I think we can prove at this point that he's cheating. We can also prove that he's using his phone. What we think is there's a couple different options. There's so many weird things going on and so many great conspiracies here. So first of all, he could be custom software that he intercepts somehow the RFID feed from the table.
Yeah, so you might want to explain how the RFID works. So the reason this happens is at a normal poker table, people are dealt cards. You don't see anyone else's cards. They go away at the end of the hand. But because this is being streamed on Twitch and they want to make it interesting, kind of like those tournament style poker shows that you've seen on TV, they want to show the hole cards. The old way to do that was you have what was called a lipstick camera, and there was one of those in each of the 10 seats, and that would look at the hole cards as they were facing down. There'd be a little piece of glass. Everyone would put their hole cards over that while they were playing, and the camera could look up at the cards, even though the other players couldn't see them. And then afterwards, you kind of edit it all together and show what everyone's hands were and what the action was and how much was bet. They've, tried to automate it more and made it so the cards actually have a little RFID chip in them. And each card has a different chip in it. And when the cards sit over a card reader, the reader knows what those are. And so there's a company that makes this equipment that gets the unique RFID signal of each card and feeds it to software that's in another room and is supposed to be 30 minutes delayed. along with the stream so that no one knows real time what the cards are. But in the delayed stream, you can see that someone had ace jack or king queen or whatever. So what do they think was going on?
One of the first things that happen is when everybody starts Googling, like, who's this Mike Postle guy? People realize that he deleted his LinkedIn profile. Now, why would he do that? One, if he did have help, that you could go back in your job history and cross-reference. Oh, he worked with this guy. We know this guy works at Stone's Casino. Maybe they've known each other for a long time. But the juiciest one, especially for this podcast, is that actually he's a consultant that works in the software industry and builds custom phone apps. We'll pursue that one first. So let's say that is him and that he can make an Android app on his phone. How would you actually get the data?
Is he an Android user?
I believe it's an Android phone, yeah.
Okay.
That's a good question. I'm sure somebody knew that, whether it's an iPhone or not. But so how do you get the RFID? So been doing some research on how these tables actually work and how you can get the feed and how far the range is and all that. And PokerNews.com actually did an interview with this guy named Andrew Milner, who developed the software. This company is based in Australia. They've been around since 2011. They claim to have hundreds of clients. So it sounds like they have a lot of tables around. And
the name of that company is
Poker GFX.
Poker GFX?
Yeah. And the RFID cards. So you need an RFID deck, and each card's encoded, and then you need a reader. The range of those cards is only 8 centimeters. So he's not reading the card. You have to be either intercepting the feed. So there is data moving. Like, this is where the security breach can happen, right? The data needs to move from the table to a computer. So the stream's delayed 30 minutes. So the commentary doesn't happen in real time because that would just be ridiculous. But they do need to record the hands in real time. And there is a person watching this to make sure it works. That person sits in what's called a peek room, P-E-E-K, and there is a live technician there doing, I'm not quite sure what. You would think this would all be automated because the cards are scanned and that it calculates the probabilities and all that. There is definitely some room for human interaction, though, to the level of which I'm not really sure. I'm pretty sure there's some manual interaction here, even though, again, just to go back from general principles, I've proudly automated myself out of jobs in a lot of places. That's something I'm very proud of. There certainly seems like some room for improvement here to get the human out of there. Like, once you're sure the stream's working, you should just leave or just watch it and not have to type anything. Based on some mistakes in the graphics in this stream, also, I would say that, and just the general rendering, when you're watching the hands sometimes, it looks like people have folded because there's certain overlays that block some of the hands. It's pretty confusing, but the data is moving from the table to a PC in what's called the peek room, where there is a human watching it. We know this to be true. It's supposed to be encrypted. You also need a USB dongle to run the client software to decrypt it. So you need that plugged into the PC, the USB, in order to run the software, or it runs in evaluation mode and times out after 10 minutes. So that seems improbable, especially when the interview with the CEO, the guy says it works by USB. And if you're not transmitting over Wi-Fi, to actually hack into USB, whatever, doesn't really seem practical at all. But after reading the manual, that changed on January 2018. They actually updated the card reader to now support USB and Wi-Fi. So this opens a different can of worms. So if it's actually not USB, and I don't know, maybe the guy doesn't, who's to say if the guy knows necessarily whether they plug in the USB cable or whether they use Wi-Fi? If you have the new version of the software, you can use either. In fact, they recommend you use both, that you have the USB and the Wi-Fi enabled, because if the USB fails, it automatically fails over to the Wi-Fi.
How often does USB fail?
I don't know. I read the manual. Huh. You would think so, right? There very well could be a Wi-Fi data stream going on that he could then intercept. So one scenario is this guy builds apps for a living. He figured out how to hack the Wi-Fi, and that he intercepted the stream, and he wrote his own app to show the cards and put it on his lap.
Yeah. I would say maybe if he got a copy of Poker GFX and maybe it has some poor security and it has a certificate embedded in it that it uses for the HTTPS between the two over Wi-Fi, and he got a copy of the certificate and got a copy of the stream, and you'd probably have to know the Wi-Fi password to get on the same Wi-Fi.
Right.
You would hope that the casino would have a SSID that's not known and a giant long password that's not known. And
yes.
I think the one thing that we'll get into a little bit more later is that usually at a casino, they're very concerned with cheating if it's going to cost them money. So they don't want you playing craps with loaded dice. They don't want you counting cards at blackjack. They don't want you doing any sort of cheating that takes away from their profits. But here, poker players are playing against each other and are kind of taking each other's money. The only thing the casino's doing is taking a small percentage of each pot called the rake. And the rake is, usually something like we'll take 10% up to $3 or 10% up to $5 of each pot so that the casino makes money for actually having that table there and having that dealer play the cards and so forth. So as long as the games are getting raked, the casino doesn't really care like who wins or loses. As long as no one's accusing everyone of cheating and everyone stops coming to that card room or something, then that's a problem.
Yes.
What else do we think might have been going on for reading the cards or transmitting them to his?
So that's one option, and that seems kind of tough. And he'd absolutely need an accomplice to get him access to the password and all that, and the Wi-Fi and probably all that. Also the accomplice route, and this would be a lot easier. Like you could just use RDP or VNC. If you just install a VNC server on that PC and then he installs it on the client, you could then get the Wi-Fi, but then you wouldn't have to hack anything. That you can actually just look at the desktop and see the same thing that he's seeing. That certainly seems feasible. From playing around with the software this morning, I think you could get some displays that you could probably get a lot of information from. Postle puts the phone right in his crotch. It's right between his legs. So he doesn't want anyone else to see what he's seeing. Everybody else, they play with their phones the whole time, but nobody else does that. And now that we look back to see hands where he is clearly cheating, he always looks down at his crotch or hopes he can look down at his crotch. So there are some questions that if you did use something like VNC or RDP, like what exactly are you seeing? And how much of the screen are you actually seeing on the phone?
And you can't keep reaching down there and pinching to zoom or panning or something like that. It could be even lower tech, right? Couldn't you just be getting texts from someone?
That's certainly another solution. There's a question about how fast the guy could send that, though, and still do his job.
The guy in the peak room?
The guy in the peak room. Yeah, all this goes back to the peak room. These people that they call technicians. That it seems pretty likely that he had some help here. But yeah, he could be getting text. Another option that the software pushes the data. They have something called Game Tracker, where they push the data to a website so that then to help you promote your stream, you can be like, oh my God, look at this crazy hand, and just send people a URL. It says that it respects the rules of the delayed stream. The fact that the data is getting pushed somewhere else outside of the system behind the firewall and that you wouldn't need to access the Wi-Fi is also something that might be considered.
So with the accomplice theory, another way he could get to that desktop machine that's running in the peak room, if he knew someone in the network group, they might poke a hole in the firewall and make it so that he can RDP or VNC from outside the casino, not even need to know the Wi-Fi password.
Yeah.
Be on the cellular network and connect remotely that way. The thing with the supposed delay while you're pushing the data to an outside system, I doubt they do something like don't push the data for 30 minutes. So, I'm guessing they push the data and then it's up to that other system to not display it.
I would agree. It would be a pain in the ass just from...
Everyone have a different delay everywhere. And
yeah, ETLs, yeah. To delay an ETL a half an hour, like, yeah, where are you going to, like, you're going to buffer it? Or, yeah, I agree. And that seems like a breach too.
So then the data's sitting there. And now if there's some admin screen or web admin thing that you could log in and you can see it real time.
It's a React site that uses Ajax and actually renders the data from a web API that's separate and Node. It returns JSON. Easy. You could then format it in your own little web page and have it between your legs exactly the way you want it, right?
You heard it right here. New phrase, web page between your legs.
It does make the story interesting. We would try and keep this a PG podcast, but yes, a lot of colorful jokes about the fact that he's constantly staring at his crotch. Well, a couple other things that we should mention about Mike Postle. He has been around for a long time. If you go to the Hendon Mob website, which is a tracker has been forever for about public results and events and things like that. He played his first game in 2005. He's made over $500,000. He won a no limit tournament, Hold'em, a while ago, like 10 years ago or something, for $100,000.
But let's just do some guerrilla math though, and take that $100,000 off the table and say $400,000 from 2005 to 2019. But he's better than average because he reports those winnings anyways.
Yeah.
Okay.
So this is a great point. You can see that he wasn't terrible. He's 4,000th or something on Hendon Mob for all-time results. Like he's a good player in some ways. You certainly just couldn't take anybody off the street and do this if you gave them the information. And that's some of the most damning stuff, is that, I'll quote Negrano from this on his podcast, it's not only that he makes the perfect decision, he sizes the bets exactly perfectly every time to induce the action that he wants. That if he wants to display that he's weak, and so he'll get raced, the bet's the right size. If he wants to bluff somebody that he knows has nothing, or has third best pair or something like that, he always sizes the bets correctly. So he knows what he's doing, and that makes it all the more damning. So what has Postle said about this? So he deletes his LinkedIn, posts a bunch of hands on Twitter that says, look, these are the cases that I lose. They're all quickly debunked. They're either pre-July 18th, where his phone's on the rail. If you see a video of Mike Postle and it shows his phone is on the rail of the table, just stop watching. This is pre-God mode. We know he lost then. You can see tons of hands where he is just like your average Joe, like me. Like, he'd make stupid reads, he'd get frustrated, and just be like, yeah, I'm going to play this hand, I don't care. I have to go home in 15 minutes, like that kind of crap. Since then, totally different. The only time he loses is when he either forgets the cards
and cannot re-look down at his phone.
Or he correctly just pushes all his chips in on the river with somebody that has a very weak hand, and that person should absolutely fold. And then that person just bizarrely calls him. So he wins 8,000, he wins 12,000, he loses 500. Then he wins 8,000 for the next 22 days. Then he loses 700. He never gets caught. There over and over and over again. He just gets out of these hands where the math says you have to play. He lost, I think, $200 when he had an ace-high flush against a straight flush. Like, you get ruined on that. He folds top pair against trips all the time. Sometimes you can read people, yes. And I know, again, there are people on there going, oh, I do this all the time. Not like this guy. You don't do it every time. 30 times in 5 hours for 22 straight days. It's pretty damning now. And it's clearly the phone. It's always that he looks down. So how else could he possibly be cheating? He either wrote his own app. He's either VNCing. He could be getting text. Or an even more interesting one, which I admittedly don't quite understand, is using bone conductor technology to actually have somebody talk to him from something that's implanted in his hat. And you literally uses your skull as, think of like the cloth in a speaker, and it vibrates in a way that only you can hear it. First of all, he always wears a hat. There are certain internet sleuths that claim at one point he pulls his hat back and you can see this thing that looks like a little crop circle on his temple. And somebody found a product that you can buy on Amazon that is exactly that size that you would put inside your hat to use them as headphones.
So in that scenario, the guy or girl in the peak room has a headset on and is just reading off the cards.
Yes.
But if they were doing that, why would he have to look down at his phone?
Well, we think he has a backup plan. The phone thing's absolutely 100%. And this is the other thing, too. He's gotten more reckless, way more reckless, or he never would have gotten caught. And so the theory is that he didn't like losing the very small handful of times. And I know, Andrew's shaking his head right now. He never would have got caught. Negrano said this, that he never should have gotten caught, except he got so cocky. And so the theory goes, and this is way conspiracy theories, that he didn't like losing those hands and wanted some backup plan. And so now he has this bone conductor as well, that he can talk to this dude.
Or listen to.
Yeah, exactly. Yes. Thank you. So that's a good question, because does the dealer know? Does the dealer have a headset and is talking to the tech guy? Like, so that he knows if the cards don't scan?
So in the video you showed me, it appeared as though the dealer was wearing earphones with a boom mic that went down to her mouth.
Yeah.
And I don't think that's for her to listen to
right.
her Walkman.
Exactly. So if there already is some verbal communication with the guy in the peak room, this guy's cards didn't scan, then what if he was listening to that?
Yeah, but I don't think every hand he'd be like, okay, this guy has ace jack in the hole.
No, not every hand. Again, this is just a backup for the phone.
Yeah.
We know the phone's a real deal.
Yeah.
But if you want to justify, I'm personally not in the bone conductor camp. I think the phone's enough. But if you do want to follow the bone conductor thread, this is how it would work.
Okay.
Is that the technician is also giving him verbal cues.
Yeah.
This guy named Joe Ingram, who I mentioned earlier, he's been doing a lot of videos. I think it's his 6th video about this, where at the very beginning of it, he shows a hand where Mike Postle is playing Pot Limit Omaha, and you can see that a guy next to him named Chase, so we can see the graphics, and some people don't put their cards on the reader, they just forget. And so you can see that Chase, who's sitting to his left, his cards have not scanned. It's now, I think, the turn. Mike Postle checks and then taps Chase and says, hey, you need to scan your cards.
Kind of point. I've seen the video. It looks like gives him a tap. He's like, almost like you might be like, hey, it's your action. Instead, he's like, hey, your cards need to be on the reader.
Yes. And then a few seconds later, the deal's like, hey, you need to scan your card. So how could he possibly know that? Unless he was looking at the cards in real time. And when you watch it a second time and see what he does right before he checks and then says to Chase, hey, you need to scan your cards. Where is he looking? Into his crotch. It is without a question. He looks down at his phone, says, oh, crap. This guy didn't scan his cards. God forbid I might lose this hand like a normal human being. I better tell him, literally at the table.
Mid-hand.
While
we're both in it.
Yes. Hey, you need to scan your card. So if anybody watches that and says, no, this is all legit, he's really that great. And while we're talking about this, about his defense of himself, that he did do a podcast with this guy named Mike Breault, who's a very famous poker player from 20 years ago or so. He was on the World Poker Tour back then. Even Mike Breault, the first thing I think of is him, is this interview I read 20 years ago. It was like, yeah, every day I was winning $1 million playing poker and then losing $1 million playing craps. Not unlike a lot of people in the poker industry. He's a little bit of a loose cannon.
Maybe not the ironclad journalist we were looking to have.
Especially,
question,
yes.
Mr. Postle.
So he gets Postle on there. Apparently, Breault hasn't watched any of the videos, hasn't read any of the articles or texts or any, like Twitter, anything. He's smoking weed because he said he wanted to show Mike Postle that he was going to be relaxed. He wasn't going to be hard on him. Hey, this is casual. I'm just smoking weed. Most people think he was also hammered because he's slurring his words. Doesn't really ask him anything at all. We learn nothing. Other than, and Mike Postle doesn't really deny it, he says, he decides to just talk about random stuff since Breault's not framing the conversation. He had blood clots in his leg when he was 33. Okay. If you don't have your health, you don't have anything. So I hope you get better, but that's not really relevant. He has a daughter. He's a single parent. And okay, I hope that goes really well. And that's great that you're taking your parenting duties seriously. Explain the cheating thing. Says he doesn't play in any other games because he can't go outside of Sacramento due to some court order based on the mother of his child that he needs to be in Sacramento. There are high-stakes games literally in the casino that he plays in. And other people said within 2 hours.
Let me guess. They are not televised on Twitch and don't have RFID cards in them.
There's no real evidence of him playing recently anywhere other than this casino on this stream. And again, as far as damning evidence goes...
Why would you?
He wasn't even playing that much. When you go back and look at the streams, he had played, I want to say 8 times total between January and July. And then when he puts the phone between his legs, he's literally playing on every single stream. So we learned nothing from the Breault interview. And so he says he is the best poker player in the world and that he is just really good at soul gazing. Soul gazing, for people that don't know, and this is definitely a big part. The math's a big part. But really where it boils down to is you use the soul gazing to figure out what you think the person has, and then you need to figure out the math. Let's say, okay, I'm 80% certain this guy has these cards. These are my cards. This is the pot. If the odds are in my favor, then I should bet or call, and if not, then I should fold. When people say, oh, I just play this or I just play that way, you really need to do both. If you're going to claim the soul gazing card at all, no pun intended, you need to actually look at the damn person. He doesn't look at anybody. He's looking at the TV. He apparently bets on football, like during the games. He's either looking at his crotch or like looking at a TV. He's not looking at these people at all. One of the first things that I learned from that is when the cards come, you should look at the person and look at your cards last. Otherwise, you're going to lose the reaction that the person had when they look at their card. Your card's not going anywhere. You should be looking at the table and then look at your cards last. Same goes for the flop. And every time the card comes out, especially it's easier when there's fewer people. If you're up against one guy, you should be staring at him. He's not doing that. He's either looking down or looking at the card. And this also gets to one other interesting thing. I mean, the RFID thing where he taps the table and be like, hey, Chase, you need to scan your cards. That's really damning. The other part before that, the other ones that we saw that were pretty comical, that look really bad, is him reacting to just like blank cards that get flipped when they shouldn't bother anybody at all. So there's one hand where he has a queen 2. For a cash game, these are some of the loosest players I've ever seen in my life. You can justify a lot of things when you play in tournaments because the blinds are going up and you need to act. I just don't understand why a lot of people at this table play these cards, period.
I'm guessing there's some thrill if even though it's not TV, it's Twitch and it's streaming and people just want to be in that hand and take that one guy down or win a hand against Postle or whatever.
I guess. But yeah, like why you'd call a raise with a queen two, I'm not really sure. Well, I do know when you can see the people's cards, because that's actually a huge Postle thing, is that he sees something ridiculous, like over 50% of the flops, because he's confident he can outmaneuver people, and that if they do have good cards, he's actually going to win a lot of money out of them because he knows that they didn't hit it. And therefore, he calls bluffs and re-raises people. So he has a queen two. These are the relevant people. He has a queen two. The guy against him has a king eight. The flop comes king queen two. Rainbow. No flush draws. He flops two pair. The guy flops top pair. He should be thrilled. He's going to milk this guy. If I have a pair of kings, I'm pretty happy. Like, you're going to bet. So the guy bets. He calls him. He's like, all right, I'm going to string him out, and then I'm going to screw him on the river like he does every time. So the next card's an eight, which now puts him behind. Postle is looking at the cards when they get turned over, and the second the eight comes over, and no one can say that, no, he read this from the guy. He's looking at the card. The second the eight comes over, he flips his hands up in size. Like, why would anyone do that? Why would an eight scare you? It would never scare you. Unless you knew the guy had a king eight, at which point he folds or just gets out of it. For a while, he was trying to not make it too obvious.
Just call down and try to lose the minimum.
Exactly. Like when he had the nut straight against the royal flush.
A nut flush against a straight flush.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He didn't fold because that would have looked ridiculous. Yeah. He bet $100 or something and then just called the guy. The guy actually never really took him to the cleaners. But yeah. So that stuff happens all the time. That a 7 comes on the turn or a 4 comes on the turn and he's just apoplectic, beside himself. Like, can't believe this happened.
I can't believe there's a luck element to this game.
Yes. That was a long way of saying that. You can progressively watch him just get riskier and riskier.
More brazen.
Thank you. Great word. That's where maybe the bone conductor thing comes in. Because I don't see why you would why you would need that. Because the phone thing's really there. Apparently, no one's been criminally prosecuted for this kind of thing. Though this kind of thing specifically, from what I've read online, and this could change. This story is evolving. Like, while we're recording this podcast, things could be different. The only cases people seem to have found, and that I found in my research, was when all the online betting things were going on, like PokerStars and all those. It turns out that a lot of those people were actually, you'd think that you're printing money, right? It's all automated. Why don't you're just raking. Like, why would you possibly want to compromise this? Well, pigs get fat, hogs get slaughtered, right? Turns out most of those were actually head bots, and it wasn't enough just to take the rake, and that they were cheating you. And a lot of famous people that were associated with those got taken down. And so those cases were more like corporate fraud kind of things, where a company was committing fraud against their customers.
And like a gaming commission is involved, even if it's not here, even if it's the Kanawaki tribe.
Right. And so this is a little different. And it's kind of what Andrew talked about earlier, where what's the incentive for the casino? If I was cheating at craps, if I was suspected of having loaded dice, I am getting escorted outside. I'm probably getting a bone broken at best. And if they think I actually took money from them, I am absolutely getting sued. They're calling the cops and any criminal charges are getting thrown at me. Absolutely, not even a question. In poker, that's not really, they really don't have that same incentive because you're not taking from the casino, you're taking from other players. And the bigger the pot, the more rake they have, so they're making more money.
Even if the pot's capped, sometimes the rake will be expressed as we'll rake 10% up to $3 or 10% up to $5. So anything over, 50, they're not raking. Just keep the hands going. More hands equals more money, even if you are capped.
So there's that. There's a lot. When you go back, and it's super creepy to watch. And frankly, I get angry sometimes when I watch these videos. He is openly laughing at people when they take actions. And when I say laughing, I mean belly laughing. It's just disgusting to watch. Oh, yeah, nice bluff. Yeah, it's amazing when you know what cards they have. And I don't know how well off these people are or whatever, but he stole $300,000 from people that claim to be his friends. It doesn't seem criminal charges are likely. Some lawyers on the 2+2 thread have said that he could be charged with larceny, but even they admit that that's very unlikely to happen. What is absolutely going to happen, because some lawyer already was soliciting people on Twitter, like, hey, I'm going to be in Sacramento this week. If you want to come meet me for lunch, we're going to get a class action lawsuit or some type of civil suit against Mike Postle and probably also the casino. It really comes down to what the casino finds and whether real law enforcement gets involved, because nobody seems to have any confidence that they're going to come up with anything concrete. it could deter people from wanting to play with a game who's, with somebody who's fixed. But I don't know. Like, what if they just say Postle's not going to play anymore? Do you think it would hurt them? They have suspended the games and the streams. They just announced a couple days ago. People have shown pictures of the table with the RFID cards, and it's very dark and lonely these days, which is totally understandable. And so that's really where the conversation has shifted now. It's like, all right, everybody knows he's guilty. Like, what's actually going to come out of this? And unfortunately, most people think nothing, that his reputation will be damaged or whatever. But he was never a professional player anyway. If he really is a software engineer, like some people think, he just goes back to being a software engineer.
Waits for this to die down, probably take 6 months to a year before all the new stuff is kind of... if there was an accomplice and if the cops get involved, then I think things will start. It sounds like there's enough outrage already where law enforcement / gaming commission looks bad for not doing anything about it. So everyone hates to look bad.
Yeah. Again, it's really mixed incentives. If it was blackjack or craps, it would be very clear cut. But this is different because of the circumstances that we talked about. So the conspiracy theory as far as the other employees, people have linked him to a lot of people that worked at Stone's Casino that are definitely friends with him. Specifically, this guy named Justin, who actually ran, I think he's what's called the program director. He was essentially the general manager of this whole live streaming thing. He's been a huge Mike fan and Mike defender for a long time. People have now gone to lengths to not only figure out so we've documented everything about any session that Mike Postle has ever played and what hat he was wearing and all those things. Now people have tried to figure out who the employees are of the Stone's Casino and figure out where they were on days that he was winning or days that he was losing.
How'd they do that?
From like Instagram and Twitter. So a lot of these people are poker players themselves. And so they figure out, like, if this guy Justin was actually in Vegas when Mike was actually on the stream, like, okay, like, did Mike play poorly that day? Mm-hmm. Like, was his accomplice not there? Some people have pulled up some data. There's nothing that looks like the July 18th kind of thing. No. And it's not really clear right now. There's a bunch of other people that are involved. But and this goes back to what we talked about at the very top. Like, people say the door to the peak room was open all the time. They really didn't have security. That some players used to go in the peak room, like between hands or things. It just seems really, really bizarre. Yeah. The fact that some of the people that do the commentary also play the games, and it's just, there's way too much commingling to really assume that this operation was secure in any way.
You know what would really help clean this up? Integrity fees.
Yeah. It did. For anyone that didn't listen to the last podcast, we did end by talking about that just very briefly, that the sports leagues, and this is new, by the way. I did look up after. The NBA and the NHL are also all in on integrity fees.
Of course they are.
Yeah. The one thing that all the sports can agree upon, we'll use the NFL because they're the biggest, that they want an extra percentage of all the gambling fees for something called integrity fees. So for legalized gambling, like in New Jersey now, I think that's the biggest one, or maybe the only one so far, where they want like 2% of all the gambling earnings just to make sure that the games are really, really, really fair now, as opposed to the last 100 years where apparently they're like, okay, I guess it was fair.
So in poker, there's already the rake where they're taking a percentage of the pot. Some places will also have a separate piece of money they take out of every pot. Let's call it $1 a pot that goes into a jackpot. That jackpot, you might win it for having a high hand, like 4 of a kind or a straight flush, or you might win the jackpot for what's called a bad beat, where you had at least 4 8s or better, and they got beat by something else. And then, the person with the bad beat gets paid, the guy that wins gets paid, everyone at the table gets paid. Maybe they'll add another extra $1 on there as an integrity fee, just to make sure that no one's Twitch slipping.
It's possible. I guarantee you that there are other people that have been playing in these games on some other stream are like, oh, gee, wow, I just thought this guy was a really good player. I wonder. As far as what might happen, I don't think Mike Postle, nothing's going to happen to Mike Postle.
You don't think?
No.
I would think there'd be enough outrage that law enforcement from looking bad would have to start nosing around. And if there's an accomplice, they roll that guy and then he rolls on Postle. And
I hope so.
Yeah.
It's just based on, apparently, I couldn't find anything that anyone's ever gotten in trouble for this kind of thing. And it just seems like people that are in the poker industry just think, people have cheated before. People talked about instances where even at the World Series, where people were reading like had sunglasses that could read the cards or some weird crap like that. And that, yeah, everybody at the table knew this guy was cheating. We just played appropriately. And like I covered my cards with my hand and nothing happened about it. I hope so, but I do.
It's the poker double standard.
Yeah, right. Like you said, follow the money, right? I do think that people are going to examine all these Twitch streams and that the people that sell the software claim they've sold them to hundreds of places. I think people are going to revisit those.
Yeah, I think we're going to be shorting Poker GFX. So Blue Horseshoe does not love Poker GFX.
So there'll be a re-examination of that kind of stuff for sure. But I'm not really sure what else is going to happen.
All right. Well, we've covered the tech angle in depth. The story is still unfolding. You can follow some of the links that we've talked about in our show notes. Those, again, are at underserved.libsyn.com. That's underserved.libsyn.com. And if we have any updates, we'll throw them in the show notes as updates or on Twitter as well. So thanks, Mike, for coming down for this emergency late-breaking news podcast again.
Thanks for having me.
And we'll talk to you again soon on Underserved.